Welcome back, everybody. As mentioned, we're joined by Wil and Elliot of startups.com, also the co-hosts of Startup Therapy, where they'll be talking to you from a live podcast session about is it better to be located in a major city? Welcome, guys. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Thanks for having us. Hi, everyone. I'm Wil Schroter, and this is my partner and co-founder, Elliott Schneider. We are the hosts of Startup Therapy. Hi, Elliot.
Hey, Wil.
How you doing?
Do you like that I broke out this 2001 headset? It's kind of like hipster cool, right? It's like
Your retro headset.
Exactly. It's my retro headset. I thought you'd dig it.
I love that you're playing the first version of Call of Duty.
Literally, I am. I'm playing Doom.
Well, listen, guys, appreciate you tuning in. I hope some of you are listening to our podcast, Startup Therapy. We kind of spend a lot of time talking about the founder journey and really actually a lot of the stuff that people don't talk about in the founder journey, kind of the broken narrative, which is actually a lot of where we end up defending the Midwest startups, et cetera, and founders at large. But today, what we want to talk about was actually kind of location-based, given kind of the nature of this conference. And we want to talk about an episode that we had actually done previously about why there is an advantage or disadvantage of living in a big city and kind of, what that's like. And Elliot and I have actually worked with over 1 million startups on the startups.com platform. And we've seen people try every combination in between. Myself, I've been living in Columbus, Ohio, and Los Angeles and San Francisco consecutively in between both those cities for pretty much 10 years. And so I've kind of gotten to play test these firsthand. And then Elliot and I have started companies in both cities to kind of see a contrast between the two. So, Elliot, starting with you, in your mind, why are people worried about, living in small city, big city? Why are they worried about where they're basing their startups from what you've seen for all the startups on our platform?
Yeah, man. So I think now more than ever, it's relevant as, with COVID, there's more people kind of examining where they're living and why, right?
Right.
But you're oftentimes really kind of talking about two components, and both of those components are changing a little bit, and we can talk about that. And one is lifestyle, and the other one is really around connectivity, right?
Sure.
In other words, if I'm living in a small city, what kind of opportunities am I missing from a connectivity standpoint to grow the business?
Right.
And the contrary is if I'm living in a big city, how tough is my life recognizing I'm living with, 8 other startup founders in some type of community house, and life outside of work is a bit of a challenge. Now, I will say this, you and I lived this when we did Afford It, which was based out of Columbus, Ohio. And if you want to talk for a second about how we conquered the connectivity problem, recognizing we had to raise real money for that business.
Yeah, it was a tough time. It was a different time too. I mean, this was 2006, 2007 when we were doing that startup. We were building it in Columbus. It was basically what a firm is now. So you take our idea and put it in the hands of successful founders.
Right. And they do billions of dollars a year.
$1 billion.
Right.
But basically, we were starting in Columbus, and it didn't even occur to us at the time to raise money. We were going to fund the whole thing ourselves. And I was working on another business that was based in Los Angeles, and we're talking to some other founders out there and some investors about what we were doing. And they said, hey, we'd love to invest in this business. And I called Elliot and I was like, hey, I think a bunch of people from around town want to put money into this. And Elliot, what did it take us like a week to do our seed round? I mean, from being total strangers in that city.
It was eye-opening for us, right? And look, Columbus is progressively becoming a more cosmopolitan city, a more founder-friendly city with some big VCs moving in. But at the time, there were only a handful of folks we could even have a conversation with around the concept of raising dough. And literally, you raised the entire round, I think, in 10 days. And it was, to be fair, it was actually oversubscribed.
Right. At a time when also you didn't have what we consider now to be a party round, which is a lot of people in the deal. I think it was the first personal check Mark Suster wrote. We had Founders Fund in there. We had Dave McClure in there before he started 500 Startups. We had Bessemer in there. And the only reason any of this matters is because we didn't know any of those people 10 days prior. It's not like these were all a bunch of people we knew. And I remember, Elliot, I remember telling you, like, man, like just being in a connected city has so much upside. So I think at first we were really like just blown away, by the opportunity.
And look, I want to be honest. One of the first hurdles we had outside of does this business make sense is you're from Ohio? Question mark?
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah.
It was real, right?
Yeah.
There was at the time, again, the world's changed a little bit. Sadly, there was a little less credibility for us being Ohio founders than what they were used to in Silicon Beach or Silicon Valley.
Yeah, agreed.
Unfounded, but that was definitely real.
And we had to sell it 1,000 times. I mean, we never got past it at no point. And I'd built a $700 million business before that. So it wasn't
which
is my
apparently
first
is irrelevant in California because it was in Ohio.
Yeah, it's exactly it. Like nobody cared. And what was interesting there too, so I ended up moving to Los Angeles while still having my house in Columbus to kind of help pursue this and corral this. And while I was there, all the entrepreneurs in LA were constantly complaining that all the money was in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So as much as like in the Midwest, you hear people complain about we don't have local capital, every single person in LA was saying the exact same thing. To this day, they still do, by the way. Like it's changed a little bit, but not a lot of it. The truth is, unless you're in one city as it relates to capital, it's your only game in town. I mean, at scale, and nothing compares to it. And that's okay.
Now, with that being said, as the world has changed, we're seeing more and more Midwest companies scale and more Midwest companies get funded. We were really, really early in taking kind of this, being a Midwest startup and going out West. It's becoming normal now. And on the other side, you've got a lot of big shops, big VCs coming to the Midwest to look for that type of scalable talent.
You do. And I think the other side of it too is, and there's no way to overlook this, at some point, the cost of living and the overhead of living in expensive cities just gets old really fast. And I think specifically when you start to have a family and look at kind of settling down and having 6 roommates isn't an option anymore. My wife and I, up until a year ago, we were living here in Columbus and in Beverly Hills. And, for the size of our house in Beverly Hills, that's like smaller than the first floor of our house in Columbus. Like it gets old after a while. Our neighbor was like 9 feet from my bedroom. Right. I mean, there's no space. I don't know. We had to get out of there.
And look, that's really changed, right? So I went from Miami to Chicago to Miami to Columbus to Santa Monica, right?
Right.
And Columbus at the time, let's say circa 2005, 2006, was growing, but it wasn't what it is today. So you and I always joke that outside of connectivity in these big cities, you're paying for the real estate around you.
You are.
Quite literally.
Yep.
Everything from who you can connect with, where you can go have a cocktail, to where you can eat, to kind of what kind of artisan culture is in that city. Well, that's changed, right? Columbus and other cities, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Cleveland, for Des Moines, are all very, very different now. So what was once a situation where the coolest restaurant you could go to was Applebee's, right?
Right.
Now we have, 7 breweries within 7 blocks, right? We have more art per square foot in the short north than Soho. I don't work for the city of Columbus, by the way. It sounds like I'm like doing a come to Columbus ad.
But it's just representative. I mean, it's just representative of a lot of Midwestern cities.
But the reality is the Midwest is becoming more progressive from a cultural standpoint, from a development standpoint. And a lot of those get better real estate around you components are kind of coming off the table.
The other thing that was interesting is once you got past raising capital and you said, well, can I find the talent here? What we thought was really interesting, we built startups.com. We've got a little over 200 people, but only 30 of them are in Columbus. The rest of us are spread around the country. Mm-hmm. And what we learned is that as far as access to talent, unless you're trying to put everybody in one building, which nobody's doing anymore, you can go hire the people where you need them. It's not like you can't get the best developer you need somewhere because you can't get them to Columbus. You can hire them where they are, especially now. I think based on what's just happened in the last 6 months, it's fundamentally changed the game. I mean, you've got companies like Twitter that are never going back to an office, right? It's because people are starting to say, I don't want to go back to an office. Our staff didn't want to go back to an office. You know what I mean?
No, we play tested that too.
Yeah. And so I think to build a remote company, basically something outside of a major city, unless you want to be in a major city, like unless you love a major city, is super doable now.
Well, here's the cool thing. And you mentioned this on our last podcast, shameless plug, which was around the concept that there are so many more startups now that people don't have to go to these big cities, right?
Yes. Yep.
If you wanted to, late 90s, early 2000s, if you wanted to work for big tech or big rocket ship tech company, you kind of had to move, right?
Yep.
You had to, take your talents out west, so to speak. That's not the case anymore.
It's a great point.
So there's enough optionality for these wildly talented developers that maybe grew up, in Indiana and or Michigan, where they, with remote work and, companies based in the Midwest, they don't have to go to Silicon Valley. And by the way, a lot of them never wanted to.
It's exactly.
We've had conversations with young folks in SF, and SF's a super cool city, and we lived there, and it was great. That were literally like, this sucks, right? I'm paying $1,400 to live with 9 other people, and I hate going outside my apartment.
Yep.
So times are changing.
They are. I think quality of life started to slow down while the cost kept going up, and I think COVID certainly has forced everybody to reconcile what am I really paying for. Now, it doesn't hurt either that the fact that COVID also shut all the cities down, so living in a city is actually quite physically a liability now. Right. But more and more, we're talking to founders, to employees, et cetera, that are like, you know what? Honestly, it goes back to for what I'm paying. If I can still get the same opportunity that I was getting in a big city, but I can actually live, comfortably somewhere else. People in big cities forget how reasonably priced the rest of the country actually is, right? If you live in like maybe 5 to 10 cities, you forget that for $1,500 a month, that's a mortgage payment in most cities, right?
Yeah, look, this goes back to when we were pitching Afford It, and the concept was buy products online using weekly payments. And when we were pitching these big Silicon Valley VCs, truly some of them said this, when we talked about it and said, not everybody can afford to make a purchase online. They said, well, don't they just get an Amex? Like, isn't that how it works?
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
For 40 million households, it doesn't.
We actually had to explain to them that there were people that weren't millionaires.
Right.
It was unbelievable. But I think that, if we were having this conversation a year ago, I think I would have still held that, a big city obviously has strategic value, no question about that. But you would have to do a hybrid. If you really want to do it right, you'd have to figure out, where you want to live lifestyle wise, and then figure out how to plug into a big city.
I think that's really good advice. I think it's dangerous to be blindly parochial. We do have people here in Central Ohio that actually have animosity towards the coasts because of their reputation. And that's the wrong approach, right? You don't want to be blindly parochial. I think, Will, you're exactly right that if you can create connectivity and have that great lifestyle, then that's the best move.
Well, yeah. And the other side of it too is like, there's different ways to get there. One way to get there is to basically create an outpost there. And an outpost could be, I've got a co-working space or something like that in another city that I'm there once a month, right? I go there for 4 days. I kind of pound the pavement, go to all my meetings, et cetera, kind of shake hands, and then fly back. That's essentially what I did. Now, I actually had a house there, and flew my entire family back and forth every 3 weeks for like 10 years. But it was mainly to have an outpost in a city where I could make those connections. I'd argue, though, given recent events, given 2020 for as messed up as it's been, it really has provided a different channel to do that. People are now willing to make those connections, take those meetings, et cetera, over Zoom, over social, et cetera, that they weren't before. And I think it's changed the game.
It's becoming more commonplace. I totally agree with that. Before, even going out west, or in you and I went to the Northeast as well during that era, and have throughout other startups. The typical answer was get on an airplane and come up here. Right. People are far more comfortable with the concept of engaging virtually now.
Right. Absolutely. And I think the other thing that we're all selling that I think people are appreciating more than ever is lifestyle. Right. Like, heaven forbid you don't have to sacrifice so much just to get ahead. What if you could have all the things you want in the comfort of your own home, so to speak? That's real now, and it wasn't a year ago. I mean, it's just so much has changed.
Well, you and I have talked about it, and you've alluded to it, that it's almost part of the comp package.
That's a good point. Yep.
So if you're making, I'm making up the number, if you're making 100K in Columbus, Ohio, or any other secondary, primary, Midwestern city, okay, and everybody knows this whole exercise, and you're making 150K in San Francisco, what's that 100K buy you, and what does just kind of living in a city like Columbus actually buy you, right? So everything from lack of friction to go shopping to, size of the place you live to just logistics nightmares, all of that stuff is compensatory, right? All of that stuff matters when you're kind of making those decisions.
I also think it matters once you start having a family. And I'm not saying it's just about having a family, but I'm pointing out that the stakes go way up, right? Like you can withstand a lot when it's just you. But at which point you're like, hey, I want to start a family, and you've got 4 people that you're contending with. Your options are very limited, from a cost standpoint. If you're living in the Bay Area, if you're living in LA, if you're living in New York, you're constrained by geography, and the amount you have to give up in order to be able to live in one of those cities is ridiculous. And then you go to any city, pretty much anywhere else, and you're like, wait a minute, like, I don't have to save for the next 20 years for a house. I could have a giant house right now for my crappy apartment that I've got, on 10th in SF. And it's like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. And look, what you're talking about is people evaluating, what does the sacrifice buy me? Right.
Right.
And we talked about the sacrifice ultimately buys you 2 things. Well, presumably 2 things: access to capital and access to talent.
Yep.
But as you pointed out before, and as we've actually gone through the process and proven, you can still get both reasonably well and not have to make that sacrifice. What a win.
Agreed. The other side of it is too, once your head's down building your startup, once you've gotten past the capital part, you don't have time to talk to anybody. When I was in San Francisco, like how many hours a day I was working, and I was trying to get out and meet people, as part of my job. And I was like, who has time for this? In other words,
that's a really good point.
Yeah, like whether I was stuck in my apartment on the 40th floor or whether I was, stuck in my place in Columbus, I still was going to be sitting in front of my computer the whole damn day. Right? There are only certain times where it really matters that you're making those connections. The rest of the time, you're just heads down building.
And to your point, they're kind of finite. If you're in pitch mode for an investor, or if you're in pitch mode to find, a new developer, new marketing expert, those are finite, and that's a small percentage of your time throughout the course of the life of a startup.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of the startups we talk to, particularly folks in the Midwest, which we spend a lot of time with, we always say to them, don't underestimate the big city, right? The major hubs are actually important areas for you to be connected to. It just doesn't mean you have to live there,
right?
And I think that's the core message that's changed. It used to be that was your price of admission. You had to put up with all the overhead and the displacement of getting there and trying to sustain there to kind of like make your dreams come true. And now it's just sort of not true anymore. And I think even the folks, my friends in the cities are waking up going, this is bullshit, right? Like, we can eject and get 10 years ahead personally, financially, and do the same thing. It's kind of hard to ignore.
We're watching and you and I are older founders now, hence my headset. Right. But you and I are watching a bit of an exodus in real time. Now, again, COVID has poured gasoline on that.
Yes.
Right. But we're talking about founders of fairly big companies that are truly thinking, what's relocation look like? And they're starting to put this concept of lifestyle not ahead of, but getting closer towards opportunity.
You mentioned that too. This is the first time in history, and I mean over the last 10 years, where work-life balance has even been a conversation, where people are saying, I actually want to enjoy my life. I don't want to just kill myself. And I think that's a generational change as well. And I think all of these things are playing into it at the same time.
And look, I dig it. And we're in the early phases of it. And, the pendulum will continue to swing out one way into kind of the virtual landscape and the concept of work-life balance. But it's appropriate. As you and I are maniacal about the concept of optimizing our productivity time during a day. Productivity is not 8 hours a day.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, you're in front of a computer probably 8 to 9 hours a day, but that doesn't mean that you're wildly creative or wildly productive
Right.
for eight hours in a given day.
No one's actually proven that to work
Right.
whatsoever, unless you're. Go ahead.
So the concept of kind of the industrial revolution mentality, which is 9 to 6 every day, or in our case early on, dude, we were like 9 to 9 guys, right?
Yeah,
it was a total. It was the time card trophy.
Yeah.
Where it was like, were you the last one out of the office? Yeah. Were you the first one in the office? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
That's how the game is played. What we're finally seeing is that wasn't really effective.
No, not at all. It was effective. Heart attack,
heart attack, anxiety, panic attacks, weight gain. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It solved that beautifully. But so listen, so all that said, I think, our overall message is that the times aren't just changing, they have fundamentally changed, right? What we used to think about is big companies happen in big cities. That is actually changing. We're seeing this firsthand at startups.com. We see over 1 million companies on our platform, see 20,000 new companies a month. And I'm telling you, the narrative across all of these founders, and we spend a tremendous amount of time with founders all over the world, has dramatically changed over the last year. And I think it's the right time for it.
Yep. It's the question now is, what would I like to build and where would I like to build it?
100%. And what a gift that is, right? To all of us, right?
Absolutely.
To be able to start with, what do I want? And then end with, and then how does the world wrap around me?
Exactly.
Because it was exactly the opposite. And I think that, the fact that we can even take advantage of that is awesome. The fact that we can have a conversation about what do I want, where do I want to be at the beginning of the conversation is awesome. And it really makes you wonder, for all the folks that haven't had that opportunity, or maybe, jumped to the coast 2, 3, 5 years ago, they're all kind of rethinking that, saying, where did I miss?
Absolutely.
So if folks are listening to this, if they listen to the show, etc., we'd also love to hear from you. You can reach us at therapy@startups.com. Tell us your story. Tell us, how you'd like to see, or how you're developing a company outside of the coast, etc. Or the other thing is, and we answer all these emails, ask us, like, say, hey, here are my challenges, right? I'm in Des Moines. Here's what I'm not getting done. What are other founders doing that I'm not doing to make this successful? Because we can kind of show you the playbook. I mean, you're certainly not alone. I mean, Elliot, what would you say the percentage of folks that we deal with that aren't in big cities?
I'd say it's probably close to 85%.
Yeah, I mean, 85% of the startups on the platform aren't actually, running out of big cities. Here's the interesting thing. Those aren't the startups that you're reading about. I'm not saying that, they're not building great startups, but you keep thinking, because you're seeing a few major startups in a few major cities, that's where all the activity is. Just not.
No, it's not. As we get more appropriately connected, we have a really unique view because we see such a volume. So we've got some really cool data. But yeah. I mean, look, they're coming from all over, and they're big, and they're exciting, and they're interesting, and they're compelling, and they're not all in San Francisco, LA, New York, Boston. They're right. Literally from all over now.
I also think that when you're starting in a city that isn't as expensive, you can also have a much smaller outcome that actually has a major lifestyle impact, right? If I'm living in LA and I have a company that does $5 million a year and it does $500,000 in revenue, or net income rather, that doesn't actually have a massive impact relative to that city. I'm not saying it's nothing. It's still a lot of money. But if I live in Columbus and I still have that outcome, I can literally live anywhere I want. I can have any house I want. I can pretty much avoid debt altogether. I can retire on that. And so you think about the probability of hitting, a larger outcome, which, I hope you do for your own sake, but the probability of hitting a larger outcome relative to the cost of living in that city is off the charts. And then the other side of it is, all the people that work for you, right? Think of how far they have to make it in order to get ahead. Elliot, you remember when we were running Afford It, and this was 10 plus years ago, how far a developer could get for $150,000?
Oh, it was laughable at that point.
Right.
Here's something else that I think is interesting about the big city concept, is focus. Now, when you and I went to, and I want to be specific about this, when we were in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, no matter how you play it, there are always going to be outside voices that are raising huge dollars and getting to huge scale, right?
Sure. Yep.
Every dinner conversation, and maybe this was a sign of the times, but every dinner conversation was, how much did you raise for your B? So-and-so just raised this for a D. And all of a sudden, you start to lose the context and lose some focus in building your own business. If you're in some of these smaller cities, that becomes less of the guts of a conversation when you're kind of out and about with other founders.
Yeah, people actually ask you how you are.
Exactly.
Cool. I love it, guys. I don't want to step on what you guys are talking about. I love hearing this conversation just because we're from Ames, and I hear these conversations all the time. And a nice little homage at the very end saying Iowa nice. That people actually ask how your day's going.
Yeah,
Iowa nice is a big thing. Minnesota nice. We'll let them think they have that term, but they actually don't. It's Iowa nice.
Yeah.
But really appreciate you guys taking the time today. That was awesome. Can't wait to dive into this and share it with our audience who, like you said, it's our audience is from across the world. It's not an us versus them. Like we started out this entire conference. It's not an us versus them. It's a together.
Yes.
Figuring out how to build a community amongst all of our technology companies, all of our startups, every company that we're building to build value for our customers.
You bet.
And there are different outcomes based on a whole bunch of different factors. Location is just one of them.
Agreed.
So really appreciate it, guys. Can't wait to hear this live on Startup Therapy and share it with the world.
Okay, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
All right. Up next, we have Katie Patterson, the CEO at Happy Medium, who will be talking about strategies to uncover talent in flyover country, coming at you right now.